This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored by Manolatus Nelson Murphy, Advertising and Public Relations. M&M brings decades of experience and their vast network to you. The firm develops insightful strategies and cost-effective tactics to help clients achieve their goals and connect to those who matter most. M&M specializes in media relations, community engagement, crisis communications, and cross-platform marketing. Learn more at mnmadpr.com.
Do this?
Shall we? Great.
Yeah.
Anytime?
Anytime.
Great.
I can say action if that helps.
Yeah, let's do that.
Action.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Sarah Libby, managing editor of Voice of San Diego, and I'm joined this week by Ry Rivard.
Hey, what's up, Sarah?
Hello. He is our environment reporter, of course. All right, some housekeeping for the week. Scott is gone, as you may have noticed. Andy is gone. He is in either Kennebunkport, the Hamptons, Nantucket,
Martha's Vineyard,
Cape Cod.
one of those places wearing Nantucket red, if in Nantucket, and playing croquet.
Sperry's, do you think?
I think he's gone with another brand, but boat shoes for sure.
Boat shoes, some vineyard vines.
Mm-hmm.
All of those places are the same to me. I have no idea what the distinction between any of them is. They're all in the same state in my mind.
Some of them are, not all of them.
All right, you'll notice this week's episode's a little shorter than usual. I like to think it's because I'm more efficient than Scott and Andy at everything that I do. So Ryan and I are going to run down some of the news of the week, and you can get caught up on that and then enjoy your holiday weekend. We will be back next week with a live show. We've got a live podcast at the Chula Vista Brewery on Wednesday. It'll be me, Scott, and Andy, the Tres Amigos. And we will have with us the mayor of Chula Vista, Mary Salas, as well as Jason Wells from the San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce. So I'm very excited about this show. It's going to be great. You can still get tickets for that at voiceofsandiego.org/events. Hopefully we will see you there. Coming up on the show today, we have a little bit more news about developments in the 50th Congressional District. That, of course, is Duncan Hunter's district. We're going to talk about Ry's story this week on the Pure Water Project. We have a new development in the They're Coming for Our Homes saga. The official name of the mayor's race, I guess.
Have they got them yet?
I don't think they've got them.
Okay.
But there's news.
Okay.
And finally, another new development in the case involving Kevin Beiser. Okay, so there's no trying to top Andy's Duncan Hunter impression from last week. I'm not even going to try. It was just beautiful. Chef's kiss. But things in the 50th District, where Duncan Hunter is the current congressman, are getting pretty interesting. There's been a lot of movements in the race to either run against him or replace him if he does end up resigning or is convicted in the fall on campaign finance charges.
Yeah, there seems to be a mix of Republicans who are like, we're in no matter what. And then there's, I think, Darrell Issa, that's the sort of big news of the week, is or recent, is saying, I'll get in if.
Right. Yeah. So let's go down the list of candidates we've got. So more news this week was that Sam Abed is potentially joining this race. He was the Republican mayor of Escondido up until the election in 2018. That was one of the big surprises of 2018, that he was ousted in a very, very close race.
Yeah, he was shocked on election night. He was talking at a campaign, at a kind of Republican rally saying, yeah, I got this thing, and then did not.
And then he did not have that thing. It was one of those races where it took, several days to shake out, and we were all kind of waiting for those updates, which are the worst. Happen faster, please. He was an outspoken supporter of President Trump. He traveled to the White House to talk about sanctuary policies and things like that. So that may well play well in that district. Obviously, Duncan Hunter's a big Trump supporter. And then, as you mentioned, there's Darrell Issa. And he's been, considering the race for a long time. It seems like he's inching closer to jumping in. I think The Hill had a report last week that he's seriously weighing it. Trump nominated Darrell Issa right after the 2018 election to head the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. But, our Jesse Marks reported that nomination has languished for over a year. It went so long without a vote that Trump had to re-nominate him, and it's still just kind of sitting there. So it seems like he's not counting on that happening.
So he's free. He's free to do things.
Yeah, he's free to do things. And then who else do we have?
We have Bill Wells, the mayor of El Cajon.
Yes.
And
he's a Republican as well. If you'll remember back in 2018 where he also ran against Hunter, there's a really interesting Politico story where they had discovered that Duncan Hunter Sr. was kind of doing all this campaigning behind the scenes, and Bill Wells expressed a lot of frustration that he wasn't able to attract any Republican donors or support, basically because he thought, Duncan Hunter was going around telling people not to contribute to him or to other Republicans in the race.
Yeah, and he got, I think, something like 19,000 votes in that primary. Duncan got, or Congressman Hunter got something like 70,000. But the fundraising picture seems to be different this year, maybe not for Wells, but for the other candidate in the race, this Larry Wilski, who's a former Navy SEAL, and he's got almost $100,000, which is kind of pretty close to what Hunter has on hand, which suggests that things
not great for a incumbent congressman.
Yeah, and I mean we're early. These are sort of old numbers from April, and they'll be updated soon.
Yeah, the new numbers should be out soon. Yeah. So Jesse Marks reported recently about how violent crime is surging in El Cajon a lot higher and faster than other cities in the county, and Bill Wells kind of speculated that that's because of the homeless population there. He didn't really have any facts or stats to back that up, but I wonder if that's something that could potentially play in the race, that he hasn't been able to get crime under control.
One of his things, though, was I think that, particularly from the immigrant communities, that there's more reporting of crimes by people that were uncomfortable reporting before. If that pans out, he might be able to sort of explain away that issue if they can sort of back it up with, real data.
And then another candidate who was also in that same 2018 race, of course, is Amar Campanajaro, who was the lone Democrat in the race, but who made it through last time around and came sort of close to Hunter. So he's basically just never stopped running against Hunter. He was basically in from the day that the results were announced in 2018. And he's been doing good fundraising as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's got $270,000 on hand, again, as of April. Just because, he hasn't stopped campaigning. But, nationally, people still sort of predict that the district is going to lean, it does lean Republican, is going to stay that way. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. So before we wrap up this part, there was one thing I found interesting in an LA Times editorial today where they called on Hunter to resign immediately. And they said, though Hunter managed to eke out a win in November against a neophyte progressive Democrat in the heavily Republican district he represents, we wonder if voters would still support him today in light of his wife's guilty plea and the allegations about several extramarital relationships, some of them long-term. So I thought that was interesting, and I kind of disagree. I don't know what your take is, but so in the 2018 election, Hunter had already been indicted, and that indictment was pretty juicy in and of itself. And so I kind of feel like it was all out there on the table for voters back then, and they decided to stick with him. And so I would sort of be surprised if, the new developments in the case were what swayed them.
It was still kind of early, though. They hadn't sort of sunk in the same way that they have now. There's been a string of stories, particularly about the extramarital stuff. I mean, when you're spending campaign money and people don't really understand what that means, that's different from spending campaign money illegally to have affairs with lobbyists and maybe not Hill staffers, but an affair with a lobbyist is a particularly pointed campaign ad in the making.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. All right, moving on. You had a story this week, Rye, about the Pure Water Project. Do you feel like this is a San Diego special in the making? Would you put it on your watch list of potential San Diego specials?
It's so this is the city's plan to get a third of its drinking water from recycled sewage by something like 2035. Yeah, I think it could be. I talked to Marco Gonzalez, who's a big environmental attorney, who helped put together the deal to build Pure Water, and he said he's talked about it may be delayed, but it won't be derailed. So he's sort of on the inside of this stuff and says that's sort of an indication he doesn't think it'll be a San Diego special. But, courts are unpredictable things. The dispute is between organized labor and contractors, non-union contractors who want to be able to get these contracts to build part of the project. And the city put in labor, union-friendly contracting language. So anybody that's hired to build the bigger part of this project needs to have union apprentices, essentially. And so now it's in court, and a judge said, it looks like, the non-union contractors have a chance of prevailing. We're going to delay this whole thing for now. And it doesn't apply to all of the contracts. So there's still some contracts out there, but the city is essentially going to stop almost all work on this project because they don't want to build a pipeline to a treatment plant that doesn't exist.
So one thing I thought was interesting about your story is that even though the delay in and of itself is kind of a big deal, the group that filed the lawsuit is also hoping that this can kind of set a precedent for other big projects around the county. Can you talk about that a little?
So this all goes back to a 2012 ballot measure in the city of San Diego where voters said that they don't want the city to require all the contractors to have union work. And has been a conflict that's been a long time in the making. Andy Keats wrote a story about this back in 2014 where the state has said, if we're going to give you money for major projects, and Pure Water is hoping to get money from the state, you need to have some flexibility. It can't be, no unions. And Chula Vista has a similar ballot measure, and they've not really been tested. And so the contractors are testing the language, and so far the city is losing in court. And I think the contractors are hopeful that the similar argument will play out in Chula Vista, where they're hoping to, build that giant bayfront project that they've been talking about for years.
All right, we've also got an update this week on They're Coming for Our Homes. Remember, that was the email subject line from Barbara Rhee, who's running for mayor. She was referring to a piece of state legislation, SB 330, that she said would give Sacramento politicians control of local land use decisions. She didn't really mention Todd Gloria by name in that email, but she certainly was condemning him for his support for that measure and saying that that was a big distinction between the two of them in the mayor's race. So today, Todd Gloria and Senate President Tony Atkins wrote a new op-ed for the Times of San Diego supporting SB 330. And if you read it closely, I think you might see some maybe subtle or not so subtle messages for Bree and maybe the breeze of the world in there. So to back up...
The breeze of the world.
Yeah. So to back up, let's talk about what SB 330 would do. And it's, to be honest with you, kind of hard to keep track because, I watch the state legislature closely and this has been amended and revised many, many times. And so it's really hard to keep track of where it's at. Somebody called me this week and was up in arms about why they didn't support SB 330. And then I immediately got an email like 30 minutes later that was like, never mind, all the parts I hate have been taken out.
And yeah, so just so you know, we're recording this on July 3rd.
So maybe
who knows what's happened since.
So it had new amendments from the Assembly just this week, but the bill would prevent cities from enacting new policies that restrict housing development. That's like a very broad overview of it. The author, Nancy Skinner, has stripped out many of the most controversial provisions of it. It did have a ban on Encinitas-type laws that require voters to weigh in on certain projects. That's been stripped out. And apparently some of those changes have pleased Tony Atkins because she's now publicly weighing in on it, which is something that she doesn't often do. So her and Todd Gloria, both kind of brand themselves as like housing candidates, pro-housing people. And yet when push comes to shove, I've found that they're usually pretty hesitant to talk about really hot button housing issues. You know, I asked both of them back in 2018 if they supported the big rent control ballot measure, and both of them just declined to weigh in at all on this issue that they're presumably very passionate about. So I thought it was kind of notable that they were coming out and writing an op-ed about SB 330, which is very controversial. Both of them have already voted on it in various iterations as it's gone through the legislature, so I guess it's no big secret that they support it. But still, you know, writing an op-ed is different than taking a vote on it. So in that op-ed, they sort of write what I think is a message for Barbara Bry and perhaps a nod to that email subject line. And it says, "Crisis breeds tension. That's natural. What we mustn't do is demonize each other and lose our heads amid fear and anger."
Oh, was it Barbara Bry that said that this bill was evil?
I don't know, but that wouldn't surprise me. I think a lot of her supporters have said as much, certainly. So Gloria Ann Atkins also wrote that residents need to be willing to give a little and be willing to step outside their comfort zone, which I think is certainly a little nudge to communities that are not really willing to consider any new development near them.
So Andy had a story this week. The Sweetwater Union High School District has started investigating sexual assault and harassment allegations against Kevin Beiser. He's a district math teacher who's also an elected trustee at the San Diego Unified School District.
That's the one. Mm-hmm. So this is still related to the original 4 accusations that Andy reported from, 4 men who kind of run in Democratic party circles, and that is what the district is investigating. So to be clear, there aren't any new allegations or any allegations that Beiser was inappropriate in the context of his job in Sweetwater as a teacher, but they are taking these allegations seriously, and they hired an outside law firm to look into the allegations, and that firm has started interviewing some of the accusers. Meanwhile, he's still a member of the San Diego Unified Board, and Andy talked to John Lee Evans, another trustee who's called for Beiser to step down, and he sort of said that, because his job at Sweetwater is so different than his position on the board, he doesn't think it would be appropriate for San Diego Unified to launch a similar investigation. He said, voters were the ones who put Kevin Beiser in this role, and only voters can take him out.
It's interesting because this has come up a lot, I think, in national discussions, but people with these positions of public trust are often insulated from kind of normal punishment that would happen to anybody that's in the rank and file of an organization. And so it's interesting that their trust enables them to, in some senses, avoid responsibility and punishment. It's a rather sad irony.
All right. We're going to get into, it's been a while, our hero of the week. All right, this one goes to the Redlands Unified School District, kind of an unlikely hero, I guess. This is in San Bernardino, but our reporter Kayla Jimenez has been doing a great job on this, long-running investigation into school sexual misconduct cases. And something she's found is that schools and school districts often don't have any clear policies that outline what appropriate boundaries are between teachers and students. And, Redlands had a really similar story and similar problems to what we've seen. They actually had a number of really high-profile, really sad cases of teachers abusing students, and this resulted in, millions and millions of dollars of lawsuits and criminal convictions, and just a really, scary culture and state of affairs there. And what was unusual about what happened in Redlands is they actually did something to change the direction of how that district was going. And so they created a number of really clear policies about boundaries between teachers and students, about how these investigations should be conducted, about what types of things should be taken into account when, an educator gets into trouble. And so they're one district who's now kind of flipped the script and become a real beacon for districts across the state to look to these policies and figure out a way to make things better. All right. Our goat of the week.
The University of Southern California.
I'm not happy about this one. What happened?
Well, back in
What now?
Well, there have been many things, but lately, this all goes back to in 2015 they raided UC San Diego's Alzheimer's research program, and this week, as part of a settlement, which I think the Union Tribune might have been the first to report on, USC apologized and agreed to pay $50 million.
So they're the hero, is what you're saying, for admitting that they're wrong.
Well, what they did doesn't really look good.
It does not.
I read UC San Diego's kind of last complaint, last summary of all the things that went wrong from their point of view, and it's really amazing. I mean, USC viewed themselves as predators. They said at one point that they don't need to follow the golden rule, and they took top researchers, Alzheimer's researchers from UCSD, and the data that they had been collecting for decades, several decades, and hoped to get hundreds of millions of dollars in grant money. And it was just ridiculous. I mean, the people that worked for UCSD also looked terrible. They sort of hid that they were conspiring. It's essentially industrial espionage. They sort of hid that they were conspiring to take all of this data and research money to USC. When the thing kind of looked locked down, USC held a job fair for all the people that worked in the Alzheimer's research program at UCSD at the Sheridan up in La Jolla, and just said, come on over, we'll get you some jobs. Don't worry about the pay right now. We just need to get you on board so we can take you. We'll deal with it all later. It's just crazy stuff.
You know, this has been going on for years, and I've been waiting for like the definitive, like long read magazine piece on what exactly happened. So maybe now that it's out there in lawsuits, somebody can put that together. But I also want to say I feel more empathy now with the Duncan Hunter voters who just, you know, their guy may be mired in scandal, but they're sticking with him. And that's me and USC.
They have a new beginning, though. They have a new leader at USC, and she's, I think, hoping to clean up and turn around this mess of the place from which you graduated.
That's what they say after every big USC scandal, so... All right, thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. Don't forget about the live show next week, and there's still time to get your tickets. There's a link for that in the show notes. I am Sarah Libby, managing editor at Voice of San Diego. Rye Rivard is our environment reporter. The show is produced by Nate John, Adriana Haldiz, and Megan Wood. Have a great 4th of July, and we will talk to you next week.